Hello! Welcome to Crying Inside, where we share heartfelt family stories full of pain, sacrifice, and deep lessons that anyone can relate to in their own life. If this is your first time here, please subscribe to join us on these moving journeys. Today's story might leave you both shocked and choked up. A mother leaves behind her 3 young sons, entrusting them to their grandmother's care. For 15 long years, she carried the burden alone, raising her grandchildren. But when the boys were nearly grown, their mother returned, not to apologize or make amends, but to sue her own mother on charges of kidnapping. Behind this seemingly absurd story lies a painful journey, hidden truths, and harsh intentions. This is not just a lawsuit, but a clash between love and selfishness, between silent sacrifice and the desire to possess. Please join us in this story, where emotions will surge from anger and sympathy to quiet reflection. And perhaps, after hearing everything, you'll realize a simple yet profound truth. True love isn't about promises, but about presence and daily sacrifices. A courtroom in Houston, Texas, on a March morning in 2023. Sunlight streams through the tall windows, shining on the polished wooden benches. The tension is so thick, you can feel the heavy breaths of everyone in the room. In the front row sits Margaret Wilson, 62 years old, her hair mostly gray, hands trembling as she tightly holds an old envelope that has been with her for years. Inside it is a lifetime evidence of love and silent sacrifice over 15 years. Opposite her is Jessica, 39, her biological daughter, but also the woman who abandoned her 3 infant sons. Today, she appears in a sharp gray suit, her face carefully made up, eyes cold and sharp. She's not here to apologize or seek love, but as the plaintiff, sitting with her lawyer to file charges against her own mother for kidnapping. The metallic sound rings out as Judge Anderson strikes his gavel. The whole room fell silent. Jessica's lawyer stood up, adjusted his tie, and spoke clearly. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Jessica Miller, has been denied her parental rights for 15 years. Her children have been unlawfully kept by Mrs. Margaret Wilson. Today, we request the restoration of custody and are suing the defendant for child kidnapping." From the audience seats, many people murmured softly, "Kidnapping." That word stabbed into Mrs. Margaret's heart like a knife. She bit her lip hard, tasting the salt of blood. In her memory, those 2 words were completely foreign. For 15 years, she never thought she was doing anything illegal. She only knew one thing. If she hadn't stepped in, if she hadn't taken those 3 kids in back then, they might have been broken beyond repair by now. She glanced across to the other side, where the 3 grandchildren sat close together. Ethan, Samuel, and Noah, now 17 years old, tall, broad-shouldered, their faces carrying the faint features of their late father. Ethan, the eldest grandson, wore a serious expression, his teeth clenched, eyes staring straight ahead without blinking. Samuel clasped his hands tightly, his knuckles pale, his gaze full of worry. And Noah, the youngest, lowered his head to the wooden floor, as if trying to hide from all the eyes fixed on them. Margaret gripped the envelope tightly in her hand. She had opened and closed it countless times during sleepless nights. The keepsake photos, report cards, medical records, all carefully kept, each faded page marked with ink, every photo still showing creases. She knew that, sooner or later, the truth had to come out, and today was that day. Judge Anderson looked at her. His voice was deep and steady. "Mrs. Wilson, I want to hear your side." In that moment, the whole room seemed to hold its breath, her heart pounding loudly in her chest. She took a deep breath, trying to keep her voice steady. "Your Honor, I raised these 3 children since they were just 3 years old. I did not steal them from anyone. I only did what any grandmother would do, save them from being abandoned." Jessica sat up straight, her red lipstick curving into a half-smile. Margaret looked at her daughter, trying to find the image of the 18-year-old girl who once cried uncontrollably after an unplanned pregnancy, who once held her mother's hand tightly, begging for help. But now, in front of her stood a stranger, a cold, sharp woman, as if those painful years never existed. Jessica's lawyer continued, this time his voice dripping honey, but every word sharp as a knife. "Your Honor, my client has struggled with postpartum depression and addiction. She needs time to recover. Her separation from her children was due to illness, but that does not erase her legal right to be their mother." Margaret felt like her heart was on fire. Depression, addiction. Can that excuse disappearing for 15 years without a letter, a call, or a single word of concern? Meanwhile, those 3 children grew up in tears, in cold nights, waiting for the door to open, waiting for their mother to come back. Those memories were not just her imagination. She clearly remembered every cry during fevers, every time the kids rummaged through cookies hidden under pillows, afraid there would be nothing to eat the next day. She bent down, her wrinkled hands gently stroking the edge of the envelope. The truth was here, every photo from the first day of school, every medical paper listing her as guardian, every report card signed by her. Proof of a mother's love that doesn't need words, deeply etched on white paper in black ink. The courtroom air was so tense it was suffocating. Many eyes focused on that thin envelope, as if it held a bomb that could change the fate of everyone involved. Margaret closed her eyes briefly, regaining her composure, then looked up with more determination than ever. "Your Honor," she spoke, her voice low but clear. "I'm here today, not just to defend myself, but to protect the truth of the past 15 years. In this envelope, you will find everything. Not words, not excuses, but proof of a true mother." The entire room buzzed with whispers. Jessica flinched, her eyes flashing with tension, but quickly masked it with a fake calm. Margaret slowly stepped forward, her legs heavy as if carrying a lifetime on her shoulders. Every step brings back memories those nights in the hospital, the meager meals, Christmases spent only in homemade clothes. She stopped before the judge's bench, her hands trembling as she handed the envelope to Judge Anderson. In that moment, the room fell into complete silence. Everyone held their breath, waiting for the truth to be revealed. The hook of the story officially begins here, and from this moment on, no one can turn back. Margaret Wilson was born and raised in a small town in Texas. She spent her youth working as a nurse in a local hospital. The job was hard and the pay was low, but she always found joy in caring for patients, listening to their stories, and offering the kindness she believed every healer should have. She married John Wilson early, a gentleman who worked as a mechanic, and they had one daughter, Jessica. Their marriage was peaceful until the storm hit, when John suddenly passed away from a heart attack. Margaret was just over 40 and had to become the sole pillar of her family. The pain of losing her husband hadn't even eased when another shock came. Her daughter, Jessica, just in her early 20s, abandoned her 3 infant sons, leaving them in Margaret's care before disappearing. From that moment on, Margaret knew her life was no longer her own. She was not only a widowed mother, but had to become a second mother to her 3 grandsons. Ethan was only 3 years old, and Samuel and Noah didn't even know their letters yet. Her small house became their refuge, a fragile yet loving home. Margaret was a patient woman, strong in endurance. She was somewhat strict, because life had taught her that without discipline and strength, she couldn't stand firm against the relentless challenges. But behind her stern exterior was a warm heart, always aching for others' pain, always trying to make up for the losses her grandchildren had suffered. She never complained, quietly working, saving every nurse's paycheck to provide her grandchildren with food, clothes, and small gifts on their birthdays. Ethan, the eldest grandson, has always had a strong and mature demeanor for his age. When he was just 4 or 5, he already knew how to comfort his 2 younger brothers and sit quietly listening to Grandma's advice. Ethan's eyes are always bright and determined, sometimes so mature it pains Margaret's heart. She knows that the absence of a mother's hand forced Ethan to grow up faster than other kids. Samuel was the opposite. Since he was little, he's been quiet, gentle, and sensitive. Samuel often cried silently whenever he missed his mom. Night after night, Margaret still remembers the image of the boy curled up, tightly hugging his old teddy bear, tears rolling down his pillow. He always had a caring heart, often asking if Grandma was tired or needed help, even though at that time Samuel was too young to really help. Noah, the youngest, was the smartest and most energetic. From a young age, he loved taking toys apart and was curious about everything around him. But Noah was also the most vulnerable. Some days after school, he would stay silent all evening just because his friends asked why they never saw his mom pick him up. Margaret often had to sit next to him, rub his head, and tell fairy tales to fill the emptiness she knew she could never fully fill. The 3 kids grew up under the same roof, but each had a distinct personality. Ethan was determined, Samuel sensitive, and Noah smart and curious. And despite their differences, they were always close, leaning on Grandma like the only root they had left. Margaret never thought she'd become a mother again in her 40s. But life put that responsibility in her hands. On nights she worked the late shift at the hospital, she'd nap for a few hours, then hurry home to cook breakfast for the 3 grandchildren. Sometimes she was so tired her hands shook holding the bowl of porridge, but just seeing their eager eyes gave her strength. Every callus on her hands, every deep wrinkle at the corner of her eyes, tells the story of years of nurturing and silent sacrifice. She didn't just worry about food and clothing, but also tried to create as normal a childhood as possible for the kids. At Christmas, even with tight money, she still bought fabric to sew matching pajamas for all 3. She personally decorated the small Christmas tree, hung up little knitted stockings, so that the next morning when the kids woke up, they could shout with joy like any other children. One year, instead of real gifts, she put in notes with well wishes and promises that she would make up for it when she could. The kids were still happy because what they needed most wasn't the gift, but the feeling of being loved. On stormy nights, when thunder shook the little house, the 3 children would run into her room, crowding into her arms and warmly calling out, "Mama, Grandma." For Margaret, those moments were both joyful and heartbreaking. Joyful because the kids saw her as a mother. Heartbreaking because those words should have been for Jessica, who chose to walk away without looking back. As time passed, Margaret became their only support. She was their mother, their grandmother, and their emotional anchor. Her strictness taught the kids about discipline and responsibility. But her boundless love also made them understand that family isn't just about blood, it's about presence and selfless sacrifice. In the eyes of the neighbors, Margaret was a strong woman, but only she knew about the long, sleepless nights when everyone else was asleep, and she sat alone with her loneliness. Sometimes she wondered if she could carry this responsibility until the kids grew up, but every morning when she saw 3 little excited faces running to hug her, she found the strength to keep going. Margaret Wilson wasn't perfect. She made mistakes and felt powerless at times, but to her 3 grandchildren, she was their whole world. Their story, from tearful beginnings to walking into the courtroom, all revolved around the image of that grandmother patient, self-sacrificing, strict yet warm, an unshakable pillar. Margaret Wilson's family lived in a small town on the outskirts of Dallas, Texas, a peaceful place with oak-lined streets, charming wooden houses with front porches, and white fences stretching along the yards. Life here wasn't as noisy as in the big city, but there was a strong sense of community. Everyone knew their neighbors, and often greeted each other at the market or churchyard. For Margaret, life in the small town was both a challenge and a comfort. The challenge was that she had to raise 3 grandchildren on her own, in difficult circumstances with limited income. But it was also a comfort because the community here was always close-knit and supportive. Neighbors occasionally brought some vegetables, homemade cookies, or simply stopped by to ask heartfelt questions. The big holidays of the year always left many memories in Margaret's heart and her grandchildren's ADF. On Thanksgiving, while many other families had grand turkey dinners, at her house there was only a small roasted chicken, some mashed potatoes, and a few simple sautéed vegetables. But for Ethan, Samuel, and Noah, it was still a special day. They sat around the small dining table, listening to her tell the story about the meaning of Thanksgiving, that what mattered wasn't the abundance of food, but gratitude and family love. When Christmas came, their cramped apartment would come alive with excitement. Margaret didn't have money to buy new clothes for the kids, so she bought cheap fabric at a local store and sewed matching pajamas for the 3 little ones herself. The Christmas tree was only about 5 feet tall, decorated with old tinsel and a few worn plastic ornaments. But when it lit up under the warm yellow lights, it made the kids cheer, like they'd just been given a treasure. Christmas gifts were usually just a few small books or some candy, but for them, those were symbols of love and the constant presence of someone who was always there for them. Neighborhood BBQs were also part of their childhood memories. Sometimes on weekends, families in the neighborhood gathered in backyards, lighting fires to grill meat, sausages, and corn. The smell of smoke mixed with the aroma of grilled meat spread throughout the street. Kids ran and played while adults chatted about work, the weather, and the Texas Cowboys football team. Margaret often brought the kids along, not just so they could fit in, but so they could feel the community connection she believed was essential for their growth. And there were always Sunday services at the small-town church. That was where she and the grandchildren found peace. Margaret always believed that faith was the foundation to help people overcome hardships. The three children grew up surrounded by hymns and sermons about love and forgiveness. After the service, the community usually gathered in the fellowship hall, sharing coffee, pastries, and everyday stories. It was there that Ethan learned a sense of responsibility. Samuel learned to open his heart, while Noah learned curiosity and the belief that everyone has their own value. That simple, humble American cultural background nurtured the three kids in a loving environment. They didn't have a wealthy childhood, but it was full of memories tied to tradition, small but warm gatherings, homemade clothes stitched with love, meaningful church holidays. All of these formed a solid foundation that helped them not collapse under the absence of their birth mother. For Margaret, community culture and American traditions were the bridge to make up for what was missing. She couldn't fully replace a mother's presence, but she could give her grandchildren a home, a cultural foundation, and the belief that family is measured not just by blood, but by presence and sacrifice. In the silent courtroom, all eyes turned to Jessica's lawyer. He stood up, his voice clear, each word sharp like a knife. "Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Jessica Miller, has been stripped of her motherhood rights for 15 years. The most sacred right of a woman, the right to raise her own children, was taken away by her own birth mother." The room murmured. The phrase, "stripped of motherhood rights," exploded like a bomb in the tense air. Some attendees looked toward Mrs. Margaret, while others cast sympathetic glances at Jessica, sitting upright in an expensive suit, her face showing pain, hands neatly placed on the table as if she were the victim of a tragedy. Margaret clenched her hands tightly on her lap. Her fingers trembled, but her eyes remained determined. She stood up slowly, but decisively. "Your Honor, I want to clarify the truth. For the past 15 years, Jessica only visited her children twice. Once when the kids were 8 years old, and she came just to ask for money. That time, I gathered all my meager savings and gave it to my daughter, hoping she would change and come back to care for her children. But after that day, Jessica disappeared without a word." The room buzzed again. Margaret took a deep breath and continued. "The second time was when the kids were 12 years old. She showed up unexpectedly, stayed for 3 days, saying she wanted to start over. The kids were still so young then, overjoyed, hugging their mom as if the nightmare had ended. But after just 3 days, Jessica left silently, leaving behind innocent tears and the broken hearts of her 3 sons. Since then, no phone calls, no letters, no sign of motherly love." Margaret's voice rang out, choked but strong. "I never took away Jessica's right to be a mother. She threw it away herself. And for 15 years, I've done only one thing to protect these 3 children from emptiness, from the feeling of abandonment." Her words echoed through the room. Jessica briefly lowered her head, her eyes flashing confusion, but quickly lifted her face, regaining her composure. Her lawyer hurriedly interrupted sharply. "Your Honor, what Mrs. Margaret just said is a one-sided story. My client struggled with postpartum depression, a serious illness that deserves compassion. Her leaving the children doesn't mean she abandoned them." Margaret gripped her coat collar tightly, her eyes burning with years of pent-up anger. She stepped forward, her voice steadier than ever. "Depression can be healed with love and support. But 15 years of silence, 15 years without a word, that's not treatment. It's running away. While I stayed up all night watching the kids with high fevers, where was Jessica? While the kids panicked every time they woke up at night, where was Jessica?" The whole room held its breath. Her words weren't flashy, but they were soaked in truth. Judge Anderson glanced at the 3 boys sitting in the back row. Ethan bit his lip, his eyes red and watery. Samuel hung his head, his shoulders trembling slightly. Noah held tightly to his grandmother's hand, his skinny fingers gripping her wrinkled hand as if drawing strength. Jessica's lawyer quickly lowered his voice, trying to calm the situation. "Your Honor, we don't deny the hardships Mrs. Margaret has faced. But the law is the law. Jessica Miller's parental rights still stand. She has the right to reunite with her child, no matter what happened in the past." Margaret turned to look at Jessica. In that moment, she no longer saw a grown woman in a fancy suit. She only saw the young girl she once was, weak and selfish, always trying to escape responsibility. But now, instead of begging for forgiveness, Jessica wanted to use the law to cover up years of abandonment. Margaret took a deep breath and slowly said, "Your Honor, if Jessica truly wanted to be a mother, She had thousands of chances over the past 15 years. One phone call, a birthday card, a message on Christmas just once. But all these years, the only thing my grandchildren and I received was silence. And that silence was heavier than any denial. The courtroom atmosphere became thick and tense. The audience began whispering, many eyes turning toward Jessica with doubt. Judge Anderson tapped his gavel to restore order, but clearly Margaret's words had left a deep mark on everyone's minds. Jessica shifted slightly, her hands clenched tight, her face trembling briefly. In that brief moment, fear was visible in her eyes. But then, like so many times before, Jessica regained her cold composure, whispering to her lawyer as if trying to rebuild a cracked facade. Margaret sat down, her hands still shaking, but her heart felt somewhat lighter. She knew she had laid the first stone to break down the wall of lies Jessica had built. This battle was far from over, but at least the truth had begun to speak. In that moment, the whole room seemed divided into two sides. On one side was the accusation of a stolen right to motherhood. On the other, the raw truth of 15 years missing, and tension rising every second, ready to push everyone toward the inevitable next twists. 3 teenage boys sat in the audience row, their eyes thoughtful as they watched the court. Ethan, Samuel, and Noah, now 17, tall and strong, but in Margaret's heart they were still the children who once clung to her, crying through stormy nights. Looking at those 3 faces, she felt both pride and fear. Proud because they grew up surrounded by her love. She devoted her whole life to making up for it. But fearful because the harsh truth is about to be revealed to them too soon. Margaret clenched her hand tightly, her wrinkled fingers trembling. She wanted to keep the grandchildren's memories as beautiful as possible, to make them believe their mother had only gone away for some reason, not out of selfishness or neglect. For 15 years she carried Jessica's mistakes, choosing silence to protect those fragile young hearts. But today, in this courtroom, every word, every piece of evidence, is bringing the truth to light. Suddenly, Jessica bowed her head, her trembling hand reaching up to wipe away tears. She started crying, her choked voice rising with genuine pain. "Your Honor, I suffered from postpartum depression. I was too young, not strong enough to raise 3 children on my own. I also got lost in addiction. I needed time to heal and find myself again. But throughout those 15 years, my heart never stopped reaching out to my children. I was wrong, but I never stopped loving them." A few people in the courtroom wavered at her words. Some wiped away tears. Others looked at Jessica with pity in their eyes. A low murmur spread through the room, like an undercurrent ready to surge. Margaret felt her heart ache. She wasn't surprised because she already knew Jessica would choose this path. She was skilled at shaping the victim's image, turning mistakes into personal tragedy to gain sympathy. Jessica's lawyer quickly seized the moment. He stood up, speaking clearly and calculated. "Your Honor, postpartum depression is a medically recognized condition. It causes millions of women worldwide to fall into despair and lose control over their actions. Addiction is also a consequence, a way to cope with the pain. But that does not mean my client loses her right to be a mother. The law protects that sacred right. Mrs. Margaret may have cared for the children, but she cannot replace their biological mother." That defense made the room even noisier. Some people nodded in agreement, while others sighed, showing doubt. The division began to show clearly. Margaret felt her heart tighten. She glanced at her 3 grandchildren, seeing their eyes flicker with emotion. Ethan bit his lip, clearly struggling with his thoughts. Samuel lowered his head, hands clasped nervously, trembling. Noah, the youngest, turned to look at her, eyes full of questions, as if asking if everything his mother said was true. Margaret closed her eyes for a moment, trying to regain her composure. She knew this was the first conflict, not only in the courtroom, but also in the hearts of her 3 grandchildren. The kids had every right to want to believe their mother, because that's instinct. And she, the one who raised them for 15 years, had become the opposing side, accused of stealing their chance to reunite. Jessica kept crying, her sobs echoing in the already tense room. She tried to touch the hearts of those listening with her heartfelt words. "I don't deny that I walked away. But try putting yourself in my shoes, a young woman, alone, just gave birth, haunted by fear and pain. I had no one to help me. I saw no way out. I made the wrong choice, but it wasn't because I didn't love my child, it was because I was too weak." The tone of those words filled the air, bringing tears to many spectators. But Margaret only felt bitterness. In her mind were the long nights when Ethan had a high fever, and she stayed by his bedside, coaxing him with every spoonful of medicine. Those cold winter mornings when Samuel shivered in his old coat and she had to work night shifts and get up early to prepare him for school. Or the late afternoons when Noah sat quietly on the porch, waiting for a figure he believed would come back. Where was Jessica during those moments? She took a deep breath, but before she could speak, Judge Anderson struck his gavel, calling for order. His voice rang out, calm but firm. This court is not a place for one-sided emotional speeches. We need the truth and the evidence. Margaret sat down, her eyes briefly glancing at the grandchildren. Ethan looked away, not daring to let her see the tears welling up. Samuel quietly wiped his eyes with a tissue. Noah stared intently at Jessica, as if trying to read what was really behind those tears. Margaret understood this conflict had officially begun. It wasn't just about the legal dispute, but also about the hearts of the grandchildren. They longed to believe their mother wasn't completely cruel, that there was some reason to justify her absence for 15 years. But the truth was colder than that, and Margaret knew this battle wouldn't just happen in court, but also in the hidden corners of the children's souls she had spent her life protecting. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavier by the minute. Jessica's pleas and tears still lingered in the air, causing many spectators to waver. But Margaret knew it was time for the truth to be laid out on the table. She stood up, her legs trembling but her steps steady. In her hand was an old, worn envelope, its corners frayed after years of being kept safe. As Margaret walked toward the witness stand, the entire room fell silent. She placed the envelope on the table and pushed it toward Judge Anderson. Her voice was hoarse but clear. Your Honor, this is the evidence from the past 15 years. These items will show who has truly been there for the children. Judge Anderson took the envelope. He opened it, and out fell a thick file, faded photographs, report cards, extracurricular permits, medical records. Everything was carefully organized in clear plastic sleeves, as if Margaret had preserved every moment with all her heart. He flipped to the first photo. It was Ethan on his first day of kindergarten, his innocent smile with missing teeth holding up his new lunchbox. Next was Samuel at the science fair, a 6-year-old boy with sparkling eyes, clutching his first medal tightly. Then Noah, just 7, wearing a worn jacket, arms outstretched as he rode a bike without training wheels for the first time. The whole room fell silent. All eyes were fixed on the photo album. No one spoke a word. Those images said more than any excuse ever could. They showed that for 15 years, Margaret hadn't just been raising 3 kids. She had been there every step of their growth. Judge Anderson continued reviewing the papers. Yearly report cards, scores clearly recorded, each page signed neatly by the guardian. In the emergency contacts section, it was always Margaret Wilson's name, along with her old landline number. The hospital records were the same. Each paper showed she was present during fevers, broken bones, and emergency visits for pneumonia. Above all, her signature appeared repeatedly, 15 years without a single absence. The judge set each document down, his face growing increasingly serious. Finally, he looked up, his eyes resting on Jessica. His voice was low, each word heavy. Where does your name appear in any of these documents? That question struck like a hammer breaking down the wall Jessica had struggled to build. The room held its breath. All eyes turned back to her. Jessica pressed her lips together, her hand trembling slightly on the table, but no words came out. That silence was even more frightening than any confession. It was like an admission that for 15 years she had never appeared on a single page connected to her children's lives. No signature, no phone number, no acknowledgement at all. A whisper spread through the courtroom, growing into murmurs. Some shook their heads. Others sighed. Clearly everyone could feel the scales of justice tipping heavily to one side. Judge Anderson struck his gavel, silencing the whispers. He fixed his sharp gaze on Jessica, eyes like knives. Can you explain? Jessica opened her mouth, but then closed it again. Her eyes glistened, but not with the sympathetic tears from earlier. Instead, there was helplessness, the embarrassment of being unable to face the undeniable truth. Margaret returned to her seat, her hands still trembling, but inside she felt a sense of relief. She did what needed to be done for the truth to speak for itself. In the eyes of her 3 grandchildren in the back seat, she saw surprise, pain, but above all she saw trust. They finally understood who had truly been by their side throughout those long 15 years. The atmosphere in the courtroom grew heavy. The tension was no longer just between the lawyer and the defendant. It had become a direct confrontation between a biological mother and a foster mother. On one side, there were only words of defense. On the other side, there were 15 years of memories, 15 years of proof, 15 years of love lived. In that moment, everyone knew this battle would never be the same again. And Jessica, whether she liked it or not, was cornered by the truth. The courtroom fell silent after the evidence from the envelopes was presented. Everyone understood that the truth was clear, but justice was not only based on memories, it also depended on the choice of the children who had grown up. Judge Anderson lightly tapped his gavel, his stern gaze sweeping the room. He cleared his throat and slowly said, "Now, I want to hear from the three boys themselves. Ethan, Samuel, Noah, do you want to live with your biological mother?" The room immediately grew tense. The three teenagers in the back sat startled, exchanging glances. Ethan, the eldest, swallowed hard. He knew this question was a turning point, not just for himself, but for the whole family. Samuel lowered his head, his hands trembling as they clasped together. Noah looked at their grandmother, his eyes a mix of confusion and fear. The judge repeated the question, "Ethan, can you answer for your brothers?" Ethan took a deep breath and stood up. His voice was low and firm, but trembled with the weight of responsibility on a 17-year-old's shoulders. "Your Honor, we don't really know our mother." Those words echoed like a knife cutting into Margaret's heart. She closed her eyes, gripping the chair tightly, her heart feeling like it was breaking. After all the years she had nurtured, cared for, and protected them, at this moment the children still had to admit they didn't know their mother. Jessica tilted her head slightly, her eyes flashing a brief moment of relief. That statement opened up an opportunity for her. But then Ethan continued, his voice choking up. "Maybe we want a chance to try." Those words hit Margaret like a bolt of lightning. Everyone in the courtroom started whispering. Some looked at Jessica with sympathy. Others turned to Margaret, full of pity. Her heart clenched. She understood the kids weren't betraying her. They were just teenagers longing to find a missing piece in their lives. But that also meant she could lose everything. Samuel bowed his head, his voice soft. "I think so too. Mom's been gone too long, but if there's a chance to understand her, maybe I want to try." Noah said nothing but nodded, his eyes red-rimmed. Margaret felt her vision blur, tears welling up. She wanted to stand up, to shout that Jessica didn't deserve this, that the truth was clear, but she held back, knowing her reaction might be seen as selfish. Judge Anderson was silent for a long time. He looked at the files, then at the three children, and finally at Margaret. "Mrs. Wilson, you have cared for these children for 15 years, and no one can deny that, but the law must also give their biological mother a chance. I have decided to allow the children to live with their mother for 2 weeks in Seattle, to assess the possibility of bonding." Margaret was stunned. 2 weeks wasn't long, but to her, it felt like a suspended sentence. She could lose them forever. Jessica burst into tears, covering her face, but her eyes sparkled with victorious joy. Her lawyer smiled smugly, as if he had predicted the outcome. Margaret sat silently, her hands trembling, her heart feeling crushed. The three children looked at each other, their faces tense and confused. They didn't completely want to leave their grandmother, but they also didn't want to miss the chance to understand their mother. It was a conflicted choice, plunging the whole room into a suffocating whirlpool. When the court recessed, Margaret slowly walked out of the courtroom. She said nothing, just quietly walked away, her heart filled with fear. For the past 15 years, she had never felt so powerless. She had fought disease, poverty, and hardship, but never the natural desires of the kids. Jessica walked by, paused for a moment, and her voice rose softly, with a fake sweetness. "Thank you for raising them, but now they belong to me." Margaret looked straight into her daughter's eyes, her own eyes red, but shining with determination. "You can try, Jessica, but being a mother isn't just a title, it's a daily sacrifice. And that I'm afraid you've never understood." Saying that, she turned away, her thin back standing straight. In her heart, she was ready for the new storm. These 2 challenging weeks would be the longest time in her life, the time she'd have to face the pain of possible loss. But Margaret knew, if the love she had for the kids was real, then they would come to see the difference between a mother in name only and a true mother. The courtroom door closed. leaving behind a lonely but strong Margaret, a hopeful yet mistaken Jessica, and 3 boys standing at a crossroads, where their hearts would be tested harder than ever before. That afternoon, Margaret's small apartment in the Dallas suburbs seemed to be wrapped in heavy silence. After the trial, everyone was exhausted. On the whole way back, no one said a word. The sound of her old car engine blended with the heavy thoughts in the minds of the 3 boys. When they got home, Margaret headed straight to the kitchen, a habit she'd kept for 15 years. She put a pot of milk on the stove, her hands trembling as she scooped each spoonful of cocoa powder. Making hot chocolate was a routine she never missed. Since the kids were little, every evening after dinner, before bed, she would prepare 3 cups of hot chocolate and set them on the table. Its warmth was like a reminder that even if their mother was absent, there was always another pair of arms beside them. Today, as the aroma of cocoa filled the kitchen, she suddenly felt her hands tremble more than usual. That trembling wasn't just from age or tiredness, but from the fear that these sweet cups of hot chocolate might be the last ones she'd ever make for them. Ethan came in first, his gaze more serious than usual. Samuel followed, his face sad. Noah slumped into the chair, silently staring at her. All 3 teenage boys seemed united at once, no longer keeping silent. Ethan was the first to speak, his voice hoarse and heavy. "Grandma, why have you never told us the truth about Mom?" That question fell like a knife, sharp and cold. Margaret froze, her hand holding the spoon paused mid-air. She heard the milk bubbling in the pot, but her ears seemed deafened. She turned around and saw 3 faces waiting for an answer. Their eyes were no longer those of little kids, but young men longing to know the truth, craving respect. Margaret put down the spoon, slowly pulled out a chair, and sat down across from them. Her voice trembled softly, but each word carried years of bottled-up torment. "I didn't tell you because I wanted to protect your childhood. I was afraid if you knew your mother had left, you'd grow up with a wound that would never heal. I wanted you to believe that she had just gone away, that one day she would come back." Samuel bit his lip, his eyes red. "But the truth is, Mom never came back, for 15 years. Margaret nodded, tears falling onto her wrinkled hands. "I know, and that's what haunts me the most. I thought staying silent would make it less painful for you. But every day I see I was wrong. Wrong for not preparing you to face the truth. Wrong to think I was strong enough to carry that pain for you alone." Noah spoke up, his voice shaky but sharp. "So that means you hid the truth, letting us grow up with a lie." Margaret lifted her face to her youngest grandchild, her eyes wet. "Yes, I lied. But it was the only lie I ever thought was necessary because I just wanted you to live like normal kids." Ethan sat quietly for a long time, then sighed. "You never thought we had the right to know, that we could face the truth ourselves." Margaret bit her lip tightly. Her thin shoulders shook. She confessed with a choked voice. "I underestimated you." In her eyes, the grandchildren were forever 3-year-olds, crying for their mother in the stormy night. She didn't realize that they had grown up, become strong, and were able to carry this pain. "I'm sorry." The room fell silent. Only the ticking of the clock on the wall and everyone's heavy breaths remained. Margaret felt her heart twist painfully. For the first time in her life, she didn't just see herself as a sacrifice, but also as someone at fault for protecting them too much, to the point of turning the truth into a secret. Samuel gently placed his hand on the table, his voice trembling slightly. "Grandma, we don't blame you. We just need to know that everything you did was out of love for us. But please, don't hide things from us anymore." Noah nodded, his eyes shining bright. "We're old enough to understand that life isn't perfect, that sometimes even Mom can be wrong, but the only thing we need is the truth." Ethan sighed, his gaze drifting out the window. "Maybe we need time, but at least now we understand why you stayed silent for 15 years. Margaret bowed her head, tears streaming endlessly. But in that pain, she also felt a bit of relief, because finally, she dared to confess, dared to let the grandchildren see her weakness and mistakes. The cups of hot chocolate still steamed on the table. The 3 kids sipped slowly, tasting sweetness mixed with bitterness. That night, in the small kitchen, amid confessions and tears, the truth was revealed for the first time. It didn't erase the pain, nor did it heal immediately, but it marked a turning point. It was the moment Margaret stopped carrying everything alone and became a grandmother. A mother who dared to face her mistakes and share the pain with her grandchildren instead of hiding it. That night, after the tearful conversation in the small kitchen, Margaret barely slept. She tossed and turned on the old bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. The children's words echoed endlessly in her mind. Why did you never tell the truth? She lied to you. She just wanted to protect you all. Those words twisted into a whirlwind that tore her heart apart. The next morning, Margaret decided it was time to reveal the final truth. The truth she had kept hidden even from herself, because it was too painful, too cruel. She knew sooner or later the kids would hear it from someone else, and then they'd feel even more betrayed. She had to be the one to tell them, even if it broke her heart all over again. The three boys were sitting in the living room, getting ready for school. Ethan was reviewing his notes for the exam. Samuel was hurriedly looking for his backpack, and Noah was sluggishly sitting on the sofa. Margaret walked in, holding a small wooden box. Her face was serious. "Kids, we need to talk, right now." All three stopped, looked at each other, then sat down together. They had never seen her look so serious before. Margaret placed the box on the table. Inside, she had kept for 15 years, untouched by anyone. She opened the lid. Inside were old papers, a few photos, and a thick envelope. She took out the envelope, her hands trembling. Her voice was hoarse. "Kids, this is something I've never told you. Your father, Daniel Wilson, passed away when you were too young to remember his face. He died in a work accident during his night shift at the steel factory. His death was so sudden he didn't leave a message, only a life insurance policy." The three kids were stunned, completely silent, eyes wide as they stared at her. Ethan whispered, "Dad, I never knew." Samuel clenched his fists, while Noah stared at the floor as if the world was spinning around him. Margaret took a deep breath, then pulled out the yellowed contract. "This is a life insurance policy worth $1.5 million. The sole beneficiary listed is your mother, Jessica." The room shattered in silence. Her words crushed the fragile hopes the kids had held for Jessica. Their eyes widened, breaths quickened. Ethan blurted out, "So that means Mom didn't come back for us." Samuel added, his voice breaking, "She came back for the money." Noah covered his face, but tears spilled out. Margaret lowered her head, her skinny hands clasped together, trembling as she said, "That's right. That's the real reason your mother suddenly wanted to regain custody. It's not out of love, but because this insurance money will be paid when you turn 18. And since Jessica is the legal guardian on paper, she will be the one to receive that money." Ethan slammed his hand on the table, the sound shaking the whole room, his face flushed with anger. "For 15 years she raised us, did everything for us. But Mom, she never once called. And now she's back just for the money." Samuel choked up, his voice trembling. "We really hoped, even just a little, that Mom truly wanted to start over. But no, it was all just a trap." Noah, usually the quietest, now burst into tears. He no longer hid his feelings, hugging his pillow tightly, tears streaming endlessly. "So, from the start, Mom never really needed us." Margaret sat there, listening to every sob, every accusation, her heart twisted painfully, like a knife digging into an old, bleeding wound. But she knew this was the truth they needed to hear, no matter how much it hurt them. Ethan turned to her, eyes full of anger and pain. "You knew about this all along?" Margaret nodded, her eyes misty with tears. "I knew, but I was afraid. Afraid that if you knew the real reason, you'd fall apart. I thought if I stayed silent, if I protected you with my love, things would be easier when you grew up. But I was wrong." Ethan clenched his fists tightly, then slumped down in his chair, exhaustion written all over his face. Samuel wiped his tears, his voice low. "So Mom came back right at this moment, just before we turned 18. Margaret nodded. "That's right. When you turn 18, the insurance money will be released, and Jessica wants it. Only that." The three kids fell silent for a long time. The room was filled only with the ticking of the wall clock. No one said a word, but everyone understood the mother-child relationship, already fractured, was now almost completely shattered. Margaret gently reached out to hold Samuel's hand, then Noah's, then Ethan's, her voice trembling. But she promised, with everything she had, she would protect her grandchildren to the very end. Ethan looked at her, his eyes red, but shining with determination. "Grandma, it's not your fault. The one at fault is Mom. If you weren't here, we wouldn't be who we are today." Samuel nodded, then turned to Noah, patting his brother on the shoulder. "It hurts, but at least we know the truth now. And from now on, we won't let anyone take advantage of us again." Noah sniffled softly, then wiped away his tears. "I'd rather not have a mother than have one who only sees us as a ticket to get money." Margaret hugged all three tightly. Her arms trembled, but were warm. She knew this moment was a brutal crack, but also a test and strengthening of their family bond. In another dark corner of Dallas, Jessica sat in her rented apartment holding a glass of liquor. Her face was cold, but her eyes were full of calculation. She knew the truth about the insurance contract had come out, but she also knew that the 2-week trial period was her last chance. And she vowed, no matter what, she would find a way to regain control. Meanwhile, in that small apartment, Margaret and her 3 grandchildren held each other tightly. Outside the window, the Dallas night was cold, but inside, their hearts burned with love, pain, and the steadfast belief that no matter what, they were still a family. Margaret sat in the small room, the desk lamp casting light over a messy pile of papers. It was late. The 3 kids were asleep, but she couldn't close her eyes. Inside her, fear mixed with determination. The intuition of someone experienced told her Jessica's return wasn't just to claim the insurance money. There was something darker behind it. She decided to use the little money left in her savings account to hire a private investigator. The man named Michael, in his 50s, a former police officer, now worked at an independent investigation office in Houston. When he heard the story, he just nodded and said briefly, "Leave it to me, I'll find out the truth." A few weeks later, Michael returned, carrying a thick file. He placed it in front of Margaret. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm afraid everything you suspected is true." Margaret's hands trembled as she opened the file. Each page felt like a knife cutting into her heart. Copies of credit card statements showed Jessica spending tens of thousands on shopping, spas, and fancy restaurants. Hotel bills from Miami, Cancun, Paris. Social media photos captured Jessica posing on a yacht, raising a glass of champagne, while at the same time, Samuel was in the hospital with pneumonia. She recalled that night, staying awake on the stiff chair beside the hospital bed, praying every minute, calling Jessica, but getting no response at all. But that wasn't all. Michael flipped to other documents. She saw the name of Jessica's current husband, a man named Robert Carter, listed in an investigation by the California Federal Court. He was involved in a large-scale financial fraud case, including money laundering and investment scams. Margaret was stunned. It turned out Jessica's return wasn't just about the insurance money. Behind it was a whole web of debt and legal trouble. Jessica was desperately trying to find a large sum of money to save herself and her husband. Margaret closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She understood she didn't have many options left. If she didn't stop Jessica now, her 3 grandsons would be dragged into a spiral of lies and guilt. The next day, she sent Jessica a message. "Meet me at Riverside Cafe at Tri p.m. The cafe was right on a corner in downtown Houston, a place she and Jessica used to visit when her daughter was a teenager. When Margaret arrived, Jessica was already there, wearing an expensive dress, carefully made up, with a steaming latte on the table. Jessica's eyes showed a flicker of surprise when she saw her mother, but she quickly regained her cold expression. "Why did you call me out here?" She spoke up, her voice tinged with irritation. Margaret didn't reply right away. She set the worn canvas bag down on the table, then slowly pulled out the stack of documents Detective Michael had handed her. She flipped through each page and placed them in front of Jessica. Pictures of her smiling brightly on a yacht. Luxury expense receipts. Credit card statements. Jessica's face turned pale. She grabbed the papers quickly, but Margaret held firm. She looked her daughter straight in the eye, her voice cold. "This is proof that for the past 15 years you haven't cared for the 3 kids at all. While they were sick, I was by their side. Where were you? On the Caribbean Sea, on the golf course, at lavish parties." Jessica was speechless. She tried to regain her composure and forced a smile. "Mom, you hired someone to follow me? That doesn't prove anything." Margaret leaned forward, her voice lowering. "It proves one thing. You didn't come back out of love. You came back for the money. And not just that. I also know your husband, Robert Carter, is involved in financial fraud in California. He'll be in court soon, and you're trying to scrape together enough money to escape trouble." Jessica's eyes widened in horror. She stammered, "Mom, how did you know?" Margaret looked at her daughter, her eyes shining with pain and determination. "I'm no longer the naive woman who believed everything you said. I've spent 15 years learning to be strong, to protect the children you abandoned." The coffee shop seemed to freeze. The clinking of spoons against cups and the nearby chatter faded into the distance. It was just the two of them facing each other, one clinging to lies, the other ready to expose everything. Jessica clenched her fists, her expression shifting from fear to anger. She growled, "Regardless, they're still my kids. I have the right to raise them." Margaret smiled sadly, but her voice was firm. "The right to be a mother isn't just on paper. That right is built from sleepless nights, from every tear, from every comforting hug. I was there when they needed me, but you weren't." Jessica stayed silent, biting her lip until it bled. Margaret continued, her tone like a final warning. "Listen carefully, Jessica. I will protect them at all costs. If you keep going, I will expose everything. The debts, the spending, your husband, and the frauds. Then, not just custody, but your freedom will be gone too." Jessica's face turned pale. She trembled, gripping her latte cup tight, but her hand loosened and the cup nearly slipped. She understood this time. Her mother wasn't joking. Margaret stood up, gathered the papers, her voice calm but decisive. "You have two choices. Withdraw the lawsuit and leave Houston, or face the truth being brought to light." She turned and walked away, leaving Jessica sitting stunned in the crowded cafe. For the first time in her life, Jessica felt truly cornered. On the way back, Margaret looked up at Houston's gray sky. She knew this battle was far from over. Jessica was greedy. She wouldn't give up easily. But inside, for the first time in years, a cold, steady resolve grew within her. She had endured the deepest pain, and now she was ready to fight with everything she had. 3 days after the tense cafe meeting, Margaret was busy in the kitchen when the landline rang rapidly. She wiped her hands, picked up the phone, her voice trembling slightly. "Hello, I'm listening." On the other end was a stern, clear, and cold female voice. "This is Agent Collins from the FBI. We want to inform you that your daughter, Jessica Carter, was arrested this morning in Houston. She was charged with money laundering and as an accomplice in the financial fraud ring run by her husband." Margaret was stunned. Her hand gripped the phone tightly, her legs trembling as if she couldn't stand. She only managed to say, "I understand. Thank you." Then she hung up, her heart pounding like it would burst. In the living room, Ethan, Samuel, and Noah had just come home from school, still carrying their backpacks. Seeing her strange expression, the three rushed over. "Grandma, what's wrong?" Ethan asked, his voice full of worry. Margaret looked into her grandson's clear eyes, her heart tightening. She took a deep breath, trying to stay calm, then slowly said, "Kids, your mother, Jessica, was arrested by the FBI this morning." The room seemed to freeze. Samuel dropped his backpack to the floor. Noah sank into a chair, his face turning pale. Ethan was the calmest, but his hands clenched tightly, blue veins standing out. "Arrested? For what, Grandma?" Margaret choked up as she answered. "For money laundering linked to her husband's financial fraud in California. This is serious. There's no easy way out." The room fell into a long silence. Only the ticking of the wall clock and distant sounds of traffic outside could be heard. The three boys looked at each other, their eyes full of mixed emotions. Shock, pain, and somehow a sense of relief. After a moment, Samuel spoke in a hoarse voice. "So all the things you feared have come true. Mom never really came back for us." Noah started crying. Tears streamed down his face, but this time it wasn't the cry of a child needing a mother's embrace. It was a bitter cry, the cry of shattered dreams. A sobbed it. "All these years, I hoped just once Mom would truly look at me, hold me, call my name with real love. But it turned out it was all just about money." Ethan crossed his arms, staring into the distance, his face calm but full of sorrow. "Brothers, we have to accept it. Some truths, no matter how painful, just can't be changed." Margaret quietly sat down next to the three children, wrapping them in her arms. She trembled, her voice choked with emotion. She apologized for making them witness this. "But you all have to understand, love doesn't always come from birth parents. Sometimes it comes from those who are willing to sacrifice, willing to stay by your side no matter what." Ethan turned to her, his voice steady. "You don't have to apologize. You are the mother we truly have. Not Jessica. Samuel nodded. You raised us, taught us what love really means. Our birth mother only gave us life, but the real mother is you. Noah wiped his tears, looking at her with red-rimmed eyes. Grandma, we promise we'll never let you carry this burden alone again. Margaret held the three boys tightly, tears falling onto their hair. In that moment, the pain seemed soothed by the deep love they shared. Outside, the media started buzzing about Jessica and her husband's arrest. The news flooded television and social media. Images of Jessica, in prison clothes, handcuffed, spread everywhere. A woman once dazzling in luxurious dresses, now a criminal scorned by the public. But in the small house in Dallas, none of that mattered anymore. The most important thing was that the three children finally understood the truth. The mother they had painfully waited for never truly returned out of love. And that, though painful, gave them clarity and freedom to move forward without illusions. That night, Margaret made 3 cups of hot chocolate again, as she had done for 15 years. She placed each cup in front of them, her voice gentle. No matter what happens outside, this house, this family, will always be a safe place for you all. Ethan, Samuel, and Noah looked at each other and smiled softly, their eyes still wet but shining with determination. They knew that from now on, even though the road ahead would be tough, they were no longer afraid, because they had Grandma. And Grandma had them. Inside Margaret, pain and pride mingled together. She understood she had lost her daughter once again, but at the same time, she truly had 3 sons. In the weeks following Jessica's arrest, the atmosphere in the small Dallas home gradually calmed. Though sadness remained, the 3 kids began to find their normal rhythm again. Instead of getting caught up in the media frenzy, they focused on school and their future. Ethan, the oldest, spent most of his time at the school library, studying for college entrance exams. Noah, the youngest, was never without his notebook and laptop. He wrote down every story and feeling as if trying to turn his turbulent memories into sharp words. One spring afternoon, as wildflowers bloomed around the backyard, Margaret received 3 thick envelopes from the post office. She trembled as she placed them on the dining table and called the 3 grandchildren over. Ethan opened the first letter. His eyes lit up, voice choked. I got into Stanford medicine. Samuel quickly opened the second envelope. Mitt, Grandma, MIT accepted me into technology. The kitchen seemed to explode with joy when Noah tore open the last envelope. Northwestern, journalism, I made it. Margaret covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the 3 boys, now young men, her heart swelling with pride. She knew all the sleepless nights and hard years had been worth it. One quiet evening, the 4 of them gathered around the dinner table. Ethan spoke first. Grandma, we've talked it over. We want to change our last name to Wilson. We want to take your name because you are truly our mother. Margaret was stunned, her eyes blurred with tears. Samuel continued, You gave us love, guidance, and a home. Her birth mother left, but she stayed. Noah held her hand firmly. We are your children, in our hearts, and now on paper too. In that moment, Margaret's heart felt like it was bursting with joy. She hugged the 3 children tightly, clearly feeling that motherhood isn't just about blood ties, but about love, sacrifice, and perseverance. A few months later, they moved out of the cramped old apartment to a new house in the Dallas suburbs. The house wasn't very big, but it was bright and warm. There was a small garden where Margaret could grow vegetables, a separate room for each grandchild, and a spacious living room where the whole family could gather during holidays. On moving day, after everything was set, Margaret stood at the door, watching the 3 young men laughing as they carried boxes. Happiness spread through her heart, wiping away years of hardship. They had truly become a family. In that new home, Thanksgiving dinners would be warmer. Christmases would be filled with laughter, and the pages of the future would be written with hope instead of tears. Margaret Wilson knew that, finally, they had found a place to start over, a home to love and grow together. After all the trials, Margaret's story with her 3 grandchildren leaves a profound lesson for everyone to reflect on. That love isn't just a fleeting feeling, not just tears or sweet words. True love is a choice, a commitment repeated every day, even when it's hardest, even when it demands the ultimate sacrifice. Jessica gave birth to Ethan, Samuel, and Noah, but she never chose to stay with them. She chose to leave, She chose silence. She chose to run away, and only came back when money was involved. In contrast, Margaret didn't give birth to them, but she chose to stay. She chose to be their mother, sacrificing her old age, her work, her health, everything, to make up for the children who were abandoned. That choice is what made a real family. Family isn't always about blood. Someone might give you life, but that doesn't mean they'll give you love, security, or responsibility. Family, above all, is where love is shown through actions. It's where people dare to sacrifice, endure, stay, and protect. In this story, 3 boys grew up with the painful truth that their birth mother never returned out of love. But at the same time, they also grew up in the strong arms of their grandmother, a hold that never let go. They understand that sometimes family isn't chosen, but the love within it is a choice each person makes. Margaret chose to be a mother, and the grandchildren chose to see her as their real mother. That is the strength of enduring love. It doesn't need to be flashy or filled with empty promises. It shows in every simple meal, every evening with hot chocolate, every nightgown she sewed herself, every tear shed when taking them to the hospital, every smile witnessing their success. True love is staying, being persistent, doing small things over and over until it becomes the foundation of a family. The story also sends a message to everyone listening. We can't choose the parents who gave us life, but we can choose how we love and appreciate those around us. We can choose to be someone's family through presence, responsibility, and a sincere heart. For those who have experienced abandonment or a lack of parental love, this story may sting like salt, but it is also a comfort, because sometimes loss isn't the end. It opens a different path where we can find a new family, where real love exists and nurtures us to grow. For parents, this is also a reminder. Love for your children isn't just about giving birth to them, but also about staying by their side. No one can replace a parent's presence, protection, and guidance. When you choose to stay, you plant the seeds of trust, memories, and lasting happiness. Closing the story, we see a clear truth. True love in a family isn't a fleeting feeling, but a firm choice, repeated through every small action. It's about choosing love instead of turning your back, choosing sacrifice instead of neglect, choosing to stay instead of leaving. And now, as you hear this, I want to ask you, if you were the children in this story, would you choose to stay with Grandma or go with your mom? And what do you think true love in a family really means? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might touch someone's heart and maybe even give someone the strength to keep choosing love. Thank you for staying with us for today's moving story on Crying Inside. We know stories like this aren't just to listen to. They help each of us reflect on our own lives, find empathy, and sometimes comfort during the toughest moments. The journey of Mrs. Margaret Wilson and her 3 grandchildren, Ethan, Samuel, and Noah, reminds us all that true love doesn't just come from blood, it comes from presence, perseverance, and quiet sacrifice. Family is where the heart is protected, where people choose to stay instead of leave, where wounds can heal through care and trust. If this story touched you, please leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What would you choose if you were in the children's shoes? And for you, what does true family love mean? Your sharing might give strength to others who are going through similar challenges. Don't forget to subscribe to the Crying Inside channel so you won't miss more emotional family stories filled with deep lessons and meaningful messages. We will continue bringing you heartfelt journeys and moments that might bring tears but also restore your faith in the power of love. Goodbye, and see you in the next stories on Crying Inside.